Well, hello, book nerds. I'm back with you with another Instagram live session featuring Gayle Jessup White. The author will be joining us very soon. Oh, you're right here.
Here
Awesome.
I am. Look at that.
And we are not going to tell everyone that we have been practicing this Instagram live bit because
I know.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I'm too old for Instagram. I would
If,
say
if
so.
if you're too old for Instagram, then I don't know where I fit in this equation.
Goodness. Okay. A warm welcome to you, first of all. Thank you for doing this. I mean, you live across the other end of the globe in the US. And where are you right now? Are you in Richmond
I'm in
or
Richmond,
DC?
Virginia, which is
Okay.
about 90 miles away from Washington, D.C., which is my hometown.
Yeah.
Richmond is the former capital of the Confederacy. So it's an
Yeah.
interesting place to be at this time in American
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
As I'm sure your participants know, we had
Yeah.
many controversies here regarding statues
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
who's recognized in American history, and that's part of what this book is about.
Yeah.
Um, Recognizing that there that
Yeah.
the founders and their descendants were not the only ones who helped build this country.
Yeah. And so I would like to tell everyone, a little bit about you because you are, I mean, it's India and our audience is primarily, Indians, the kind who live in Asia, of course. so, okay, guys. So, all those book lovers, you must be wondering what is Gayle doing here. She is here to, talk about her book, Reclamation. And I would request her if she has got a copy at hand to show the cover because I have the PDF only. It would be great. And so
Here
this
it is.
book,
Here we go.
and it's quite a hefty one. It's a hardcover. I can look at it and kind of figure it out. Okay, Gayle is a third generation Washingtonian whose lineage extends as far back as the indigenous people who inhabited the Chesapeake what is it?
That's
Chesapeake
right.
area. Yeah, before
Right.
that, the Europeans in the US. And, of course, has been a journalist. She has, she has been a TV reporter. And of course, along with doing all of that, she suddenly, came across this, sort of a statement by her relative, one of her relatives, that she might be, related to Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the US, and she was immediately intrigued with that. And but it took her a while, to kind of, explore that in detail. Right now, she is working at Monticello, which is the mansion. Should I call it a mansion? Right?
It is a mansion, so that's fair. It's the home, of course, of Thomas Jefferson
Yeah.
and his children, his descendants, his children and grandchildren lived there for a while, and over decades, some 400 enslaved men, women, and children.
Yeah, and I mean, it has got for those of you who are well versed with American history, you would know what I'm talking about. Of course, it was a plantation where there were several slaves. Around 600 and it is such a contradiction, right? I mean, and you work there now. I mean, it's the cover of the name of the book is so apt, Reclamation. I'll be asking you why you chose that name. It is just, what a journey of finding one's lineage and writing about it. It's just another thing. There is so much I want to ask you, but let's start. The moment when you got to know that one statement by, Aunt Peachy. I wanted to
Mm.
start with, and of course, let's go from there.
Oh, sure. Well, of course, I never knew Aunt Peachy.
Yeah,
The story started out in Washington, D.C., where, as you mentioned, I grew up. I didn't know growing up in Washington, D.C., that Thomas Jefferson owned 600 people throughout his life. I 400 of those people lived at Monticello. Jefferson had many other plantations aside from Monticello. That's the most famous. So when I was 13, Thomas Jefferson was in fact my favorite
Yeah.
president, and it was because he'd written the Declaration of Independence. And I couldn't imagine a document as
Yeah.
significant as that. I knew that 4th of July was a great time to have a party.
Yeah.
I also knew that it meant freedom for Americans.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for me, as a 13-year-old girl growing up in DC, I was an American. I didn't see
Yeah.
myself as a Black American.
Right.
So, because I didn't know our history, and we'll get into that in a minute. When I was 13, I overheard my sister, who's about 20 years older, to speak directly to your question, um, having a conversation with my dad. And during the course of the conversation, I overheard my sister, I'd gone to another room, I overheard my sister saying, and I said, well, I'm a descendant from Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I was immediately intrigued. I'd never heard this. As I just explained, Jefferson was my favorite president. I wanted to know much more. And so I pressed my dad about it. What was Jan talking about? And was it true? And the reason I went to my dad about it, because my dad was 6'2". Your viewers might know that Jefferson was 6'2". My
Yeah.
dad had freckles. Of course, Jefferson had freckles. And my dad had red hair. So there was some circumstantial evidence that, in fact, there was some truth to it. But my dad never, at that point, didn't want to acknowledge that we had this connection to Thomas Jefferson. It's very complicated. It's a part of American history, in fact, that Black people felt uncomfortable, in fact, maybe even ashamed of
Yeah.
their white ancestry, because it meant that a woman in their background had been compromised or somehow exploited. So my dad didn't want to talk about it, but I, even at 13, 14, and 15, was a budding journalist and unrelenting. So
Yeah.
I continued pressing my dad about it. And he finally acknowledged that his mother, in fact, was from Charlottesville, which is where was from, which is where Monticello is.
Yeah.
And he showed me a picture of his mother, who was a very beautiful woman. And we continued from there. I continued from there, asking more questions of my sister. So as I mentioned, my sister's 20 years older than I. The
Yeah.
story I overheard her tell to Dad was about an incident that happened or an event that
Yeah.
happened in Asia, in Singapore, where she was living with her husband, who was covering the Vietnam War for Time
Yeah.
magazine. So this is decades ago.
Right.
My sister and her husband were the guests of honor at the American Embassy in Saigon. And they were the only Black people at the dinner table. In the course of dining, the Americans there at the table were discussing their lineage and, according to my sister, bragging about it as if
Yeah.
they were descended from royalty, which of course is what we fought against. It's why we had the Revolutionary War. So she was very
Yeah.
offended by this.
Yeah.
And she gave her, this is back in the early 70s,
Yeah.
maybe even late 60s. She gave her husband a look, because at that time, women really needed the affirmation of their husbands, many, to move forward with what my sister had in mind.
Yeah.
And he nodded because he knew it was coming. And what my sister said during the course of this conversation at the dinner table, when they were the only Blacks, was,
Yeah.
well, I'm descended from Thomas Jefferson. My sister said that the room went dead silent. You could
Yeah.
only hear the silver touching the china. This
Yeah.
is the story that she was sharing with my dad when I overheard her say, we're descended from Thomas Jefferson. This is the story she shared with me when I went to her and said, Jan, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And this is when I learned that she gathered this information, heard this information from Aunt Peachy. Now, I have
Yeah.
to tell you, I didn't know who Aunt Peachy was. I'd never heard
Right.
of her,
Yeah.
but she, in fact, lived with our family for 20 years.
Wow.
20 years.
Wow.
And I didn't know who she
Yeah.
was. She passed on when I was a baby.
Yeah.
Aunt Peachy could neither read, write, or spell her own name. She
Yeah.
was my grandmother's half sister. And she
Yeah.
would say to my sister Janice, you're descended from Thomas Jefferson. I'm not, but you
Yeah.
are.
Wow.
And she was the only one, because my dad didn't like to speak of it for reasons I briefly explained. Nobody else knew of the history, which you can read about in the book. My grandmother was no longer alive. Nobody
Yeah.
passed it down to our family aside from Aunt Peachy, a woman who was a
Yeah.
domestic, could not read, write, spell her own name, and who seemed to have been forgotten by my family. So
Right.
I am very grateful to her and to Janice. Now,
Yeah.
a question would arise. Why would my family not talk about my grandmother's half sister, a woman who lived with us for 20 years? Well,
Right.
I write about this in the book as well. We had secrets in my family.
I know. I read the complete and I was like, okay, things are unraveling. Suddenly,
Yes.
perfect sort of setup, and you have kind of compared it to a sitcom also. From I suppose it was the 50s. That sitcom.
Oh,
Yeah.
father knows best.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So it was like must have been that sitcom where everything is perfect and the patriarch
Exactly.
is sort of
Exactly.
ruling.
You're absolutely right. You hit it right on the head. Everything was perfect.
Yeah.
That's what people wanted America to be in the 50s and 60s. Everything perfect. That's what we wanted to be in our family. But beneath the surface in my family, just as beneath the surface and not so much beneath the United States of America, there was simmering discord.
Yeah.
And we saw it, I saw it in my family as I grew older. We've seen it in America burst forward through periods of time.
Yeah.
We saw it in the 1960s. We're seeing it again now. But there's always beneath in my family, there was something kept beneath to protect us. In
Yeah.
the United States, there was something beneath to protect the mythology that this country was founded on freedom. It was
Right.
not. This country was founded on hypocrisy. And because when Jefferson, my ancestor, wrote the Declaration of Independence, he was served by an enslaved man named Robert Hemings, who was
Yeah.
also my ancestor, a
Yeah.
man that Jefferson owned.
Yeah.
So a huge swath of people were excluded from that declaration, to say nothing of people who didn't own property. If you were a white man who didn't own property, you couldn't vote either, but you certainly had some rights and privileges, but you couldn't
Yeah.
vote.
Yeah. But tell me something. I mean, of course, I read the book, and there is so much of history there. It was just amazing. Thank you for writing it, first of
Thank
all.
you.
But more than that, I was wondering, on the contrary, that course, I mean, this man who has written the Declaration of Independence, and it's a contradiction because this person is owning 600 slaves, and it is so deep rooted that it also, kind of, raised its ugly head in the Black Lives movement recently. Kind of, I mean, indirectly perhaps. But why would you go and find a lineage, to that man? I was wondering because, of course, you have, told everything in the book, but I'm sure the audience would love to know.
Well, so as I explained, when I was a kid growing up, Jefferson was my favorite president. I did
Yeah.
not grow up knowing, most people, do believe, didn't grow up knowing that Jefferson owned people. Not when I was a child learning history.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was, of course, curious. I wanted to
Yeah.
know. I wanted to understand how this could possibly be true. I wanted to know whether I was related to the third president of the United States, somebody whom I admired so.
Yeah.
So it was it made sense to want to explore this history.
Right. Right.
I would have been remiss, I think, if had I not wanted to explore this history, as
Right.
my sister felt uh, strong about it, so
Yeah.
adamant about it, that she would shake up a dinner party thousands of miles away from home
Yeah.
to bring it up. It
Right.
clearly meant something to some people in my family. It meant
Yeah.
enough to Aunt Peachy
Yeah.
to share it with to Janice as
Right.
often as she could, so that Janice,
Yeah.
over so many years, absorbed this and served it, shared it. So it was significant. I wanted to know. But it's, of course, nothing is as simple as on the surface. There was
Yeah.
much more to my motivation, and it had to do with, as I mentioned, the discord in my family. I don't want to get into it now because it's all in the book, and it's long. It's emotional, and
Yeah.
it's
And
very,
there's so
very
many,
human. It's very
and there's
human.
so many, right? I mean, there's so many events. It's not just one thing. It's just, leading up to kind of, so one has to read the book, of course. I would encourage everyone to kind of pick up a copy. Also, sorry to cut you off. You were saying.
It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
No.
No, I really, because, it's such an interesting thing because you kind of, ended up working at the place where kind of, so intrigued by. It's amazing. And I would like to tell everyone that Gayle works as a community engagement officer at Monticello. And tell us, I mean, that experience, working there and kind of being a part of, what I mean, kind of you were connected to it, of course, but you wouldn't have ever imagined, perhaps, that you would be working there, although you would have kind
No.
of thought that, oh, wish I would. But tell us a little bit about that, especially people who are watching. They would love to know how it kind of feels when you get connected to this lineage, but again, you are at the place where your ancestors were kind of have suffered also.
Well, that's such a great question because here's the point. As I uncovered my ties to Jefferson, I also uncovered my relationships there to the enslaved families. So I learned that I am descendant. It took me, this book is part detective story. It took me some 40 years to determine
I
this.
It is so much a detective story. I didn't want to say it, but it is a detective story. Why not put it in that genre? Let's put it on the
But it's fair. I mean, it really is. You're absolutely right.
checklist. Yeah.
And so, in the course of uncovering this history, I discovered that I'm descended from two enslaved families at Monticello, the Hemingses and the Hubbards. The Hemingses, of course, were related to, let me rephrase that. The Hemingses were the most prominent enslaved family at Monticello, in that it was the largest family enslaved there. There were generations of Hemingses enslaved there. And of
Yeah.
course, it was the family of the famous Sally Hemings, the enslaved
Yeah.
woman who bore Thomas Jefferson's 6 children.
Yeah.
So, what draws me to Monticello is not that it was Thomas Jefferson's home.
Yeah.
What compels me to work there is that it was the home of those enslaved people.
Right.
Those people who have been unrecognized, those people who were voiceless in their lifetime, those people who made Thomas Jefferson the person that he was. For
Yeah.
had it not been for those enslaved people providing for his every single need, he
Yeah.
wouldn't have had the time or the bandwidth,
True.
to use 21st century language, to write the Declaration, to
Yeah.
write the statute for religious freedom in Virginia, to do all the investigating, invention, statesmanship, all that Jefferson is given credit for.
Yeah.
People here like to say that Jefferson was America's first foodie. Do you think that Thomas Jefferson really knew how to plant a seed? He was he wasn't planting seeds. He
I know.
wasn't
I know.
cooking in the kitchen. It was my
Yeah.
ancestor, Peter
Yeah.
Hemings, who was
Yeah.
cooking in that kitchen, and others. They fed him. They
Yeah.
washed his clothes. They
Yeah.
toiled they did all the toil and labor and tilled his soil. They did everything for him. They
Right.
literally built Monticello.
Yeah.
If you ever visit Monticello,
Yeah.
you'll see in the bricks, it's a beautiful building, you'll
Yeah.
see in the bricks imprints of fingers, children's fingers. Children were making the bricks that went into the construction of
Yeah.
Monticello.
It is it it this story, and whatever has happened uh in and around, say, what was, or at Monticello, but it is so international, because these kind of stories, we even in India we have got this a place where there were several thousands of people killed by the Britishers. It's called Jallianwala Bagh. So it's up here near Delhi, and when you go there, you you feel something else. I'm sure that it is the same thing that you kind of experience when you are at Monticello. We'll go back to other things. Of course, I wanted to really go back, go talk to you about that article you wrote in the Root, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
I really wanted to read you to read from there because it is so amazing. Perhaps if you could do that for us. But before that, we'll take a question by Aditya. He's asking, "Hi, with such a divisive political climate in the U.S. today, what do you hope to achieve with this book?"
Another great question. Part of the point of this story is to help people recognize the contributions of Black Americans,
Yeah,
how much millions of people did to help build this country. Millions of faceless people, millions of people who were just counted as property, whose names we might not or will not ever know, who helped make this place whole.
right.
Part of my goal is to help people see enslaved people as human.
Yeah,
It's important to humanize
yeah,
enslaved people
yeah,
and bring that forward. In so doing, their descendants will be seen as human and as American. So we
yeah,
can stop the killings, so we can stop the marginalization, so we can stop the gerrymandering,
yeah,
so we can stop the divisiveness that is threatening our democracy. We
yeah,
all contributed to the success of this country.
yeah.
This country doesn't belong to one race. And I believe that if we can see the
Yeah.
diversity of those who contributed to make this country successful, understand the history, then we can move
Awesome.
forward in a healthy way. We can begin to heal. The point of this book is to help people heal. There's nothing in here that's attempting to divide. It's all about helping us heal. And it's very honest.
Yeah. It I can vouch for that. I mean, it doesn't get more honest. And I was talking about that article. If you could find and perhaps read it for the audience, that would be great. And till that time, I also wanted to kind of ask you about that excavation that happened recently in 2017, which was very interesting for me, where there was a room that was not, found yet, and that was excavated and found. Can you tell us more about that?
I can.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned, Sally Hemings was the enslaved woman who bore Jefferson 6 children, 4 of whom survived into adulthood.
Yeah.
It was rumored during Jefferson's lifetime and during his presidency that he, in fact, had relations with an enslaved woman. The press referred to her as Dusky Sally. Of course,
Wow.
Jefferson never addressed it. I know, it's so offensive. Jefferson never addressed it, but the rumors continued even after his death. One of his first biographers was a man named Henry Randall. Henry
Okay.
Randall visited Monticello and was shown a room that Jefferson's grandson, who happens to be my 3 times great grandfather, said was Sally Hemings's room. Now, this room is part of a colonnade that's attached to the main house, but on the basement of level of it.
Okay.
So it's several yards away from Jefferson's main house and Jefferson's rooms. And it is in this colonnade that it's believed Sally Hemings' room was. And we believe that because that's what Jefferson's grandson told Henry Randall.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is Sally Hemings' room. Over the years, that room was filled in, ignored, and at one point covered, when the foundation bought Monticello, covered by a men's bathroom.
Yeah.
So the imagery of that is speaks for itself.
Yeah.
In 2017, Monticello's archaeologist, and I want to deviate for a second.
Yeah.
Monticello is absolutely committed to telling a complete story of Thomas Jefferson and what happened on that plantation during his lifetime and after.
Yeah.
So in 2017, we excavated that space and restored it, not to what it was during Jefferson's time, but restored it to make it a place of memorial to Sally Hemings.
Yeah.
So when you come to that space now, it's called The Life of Sally Hemings. You will see the words of her son, their son, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings' son, describing his mother and what her life was like.
Okay.
And so we honor Sally Hemings. We honor the enslaved people at Monticello. We tell as much as we can and use their names as often as possible. In my book, I won't do it now because it's just too much for people. But in my book, I make a point of using the names and using complete names. You won't hear me say Sally and Jefferson, because that doesn't honor her. That diminishes her. You'll hear me say Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, or Hemings and Jefferson.
Yeah,
that's important, and that's what we do at Monticello, and that's what I do in the book. So we resurrected that space. We reclaimed that space.
Yeah.
And that's why the book is called, again, Reclamation, because I, as a symbol of so many people, so many Black people, I am reclaiming that space, Monticello, and spaces like it, as again, a memorial to what my ancestors did, and as a representation of what the ancestors of so many Black people did.
And throughout the book, of course, I mean, it's sometimes it gets a little bit complicated, the lineage, but it is always fun to kind of, it's a puzzle. So it's great to, go through all of it. And at one point, of course, I was talking about that article, but it was a kind of, you did that article because you were not that happy. I mean, you had found a family member, and she wrote, she's of course a writer, and she wrote a separate article in the New York Times, which you were not happy about. So tell us a little bit about that, and that reading, if you could.
So after the experience you and I had yesterday, I'm just going to digress again. You know that I don't multitask that well, so I couldn't have a conversation that for me is a very serious one. And look on my computer for that piece. It was just not accessible. I can read from the book if you'd like, but
sure. Yeah.
And I would encourage people to look for that piece on the root, and some of it's quoted in the book as well.
Right.
But yes, to speak to your question, I did have a relationship with one of the descendants, and I have relationships with many of the white descendants of Jefferson, really healthy relationships. We call each other cousin. We function as much as we can as family. Yeah. And I forged one with a woman named Tess Taylor, and she's a very good writer. And we were enjoying our relationship. And she helped me with the DNA testing. And she wrote a piece in the New York Times. And my immediate reaction, we discussed it before, was I'd like to be part of this. Let's do this together. But she said, not this time. So she wrote the piece. And at first I thought, well, here's a story about me in the New York Times.
Yeah.
And initially, I wanted it to be okay, but it wasn't. It just wasn't.
Because I
felt
read the article. I went through the article, and first read, you say, okay, it's kind of harmless, but perhaps and kind of note that it was like I thought it was a bit casual. I thought, I don't know, I could be wrong.
It not only was it casual, but it made me a bit player in my own story. That's how I felt. That it made me a bit player in my own story. And as you said, the story had so much more depth than that. It was much more than cousins meeting. It was me trying to put this puzzle together, me trying to make my family whole. And all of that was missing because it wasn't my story. I wasn't telling my own story.
Right.
And it felt a little like, it just felt like I was being robbed of my voice.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened to my ancestors. And this is not to compare, and Tess is a fine person. This is not to compare that the story she wrote to what happened to the enslaved people. Obviously, that's absurd. This is just to say how I felt. I felt that I had been robbed of my voice.
Right. But you
So
don't criticize. You have mentioned in the book also, you don't criticize, and you have been taught, you kind of brought up like that. I would imagine somebody else, kind of yeah, being very angry with that. But you have kind of, it was a mellow response, to be honest.
so I try to be we mentioned the divisiveness. I try to be very calm in
Yeah.
my response and my reaction
Yeah.
to some of the experiences I have as a Black person, as a minority living in this country. If I reacted to every provocation, I would not be alive today. I would be,
I
you know,
I would agree with that. I would agree with that because if you go through the guys, if you go through the book, there were several times that uh, I mean, a casual sort of racism comes in. I mean,
exactly,
it could be that lady at the side of the pool where you met a friend whom you kind of she was a friend, but of course she was white, and then her mother says that kind of you she gives you the stare and tells you like, okay, stay.
exactly,
So that I think that was the first time you sort of encountered got the concept of color.
exactly. I didn't grow up having that experience. I grew up middle class in Washington, D.C., in a majority Black city and feeling very comfortable in my own skin. So to have that experience when I was 13 years old, the same time that I learned that I was descended from Thomas Jefferson, was a revelation and a life changing moment. And throughout my life, there have been several life changing moments,
Yeah.
including living here in, as I mentioned, the former capital of the Confederacy, where just uh, several months ago, a year more than a year ago, there were statues that
Yeah.
for 100 years paved the most elegant boulevard, the most elegant street in Richmond,
Right.
with huge Confederate statues
Yeah.
to Jackson and Lee and Jefferson Davis. What could be more offensive?
Yeah.
So yes, we've lived through a lot, and thank God those statues are gone now. But we're
That
still
happened.
living with the residue of and the consequences of enslavement in this country.
Right. Did that happen in 2017 or 2020?
No, that was in 2020.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that was the
The
summer of 2020.
riot, Charlottesville, that riot,
Charlottesville was 2017.
2017. Right.
Right.
Right. Right. Great. There
And,
we
and
have a
and the
question.
thing that really gets to me is that so growing up, as you mentioned, the the racism that I encountered. So I didn't experience racism until I was 13 years old and continued to kind of brush it aside. And but as I grew older, I did learn more about the civil rights movement. I learned about the oppression and suppression of Black folk, and thought it was over. I got to a level of comfort with it. And then you come here in the 21st century and you see you're still dealing with some of the same issues in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I write about this in the book, which was called for, identified by the purveyors of this sort of information as the happiest small town in the United States of America. Not true. And in 2017, They
I
had
know.
riots. There was
I know.
violence. A
Yeah.
woman was killed. There were
I
racial issues.
horrified at that picture of at that video, where the car speeds and
Yes,
sort of rams into, and I think so many people were killed or injured in that one, right?
many people were. Heather Heyer was her name. She was killed. A couple of police officers were killed in a helicopter. Scores were injured. And to say nothing of the psychological damage done to the people involved and to the country as a result.
Yeah,
Now, when people say Charlottesville, and not just in the United States, I mean, look where you're in India,
yeah,
and you say Charlottesville, and you know exactly,
yeah.
what we're talking about
It
here.
affects it affects democracy, to be honest, and this is why we have picked the research team has picked up this book, because
Thank you.
discrimination always affects the entire world. It could be in one town in, say, I don't know, Alaska or something, but it will affect all of us, and that's
Exactly.
why this book is so important. We have a question here for you. uh, Told me to is asking, from what we know, black history is still treated as an elective course in American schools in spite of it being such a big part of American history.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
is that
I'm sorry. I don't have COVID. I just have sinuses. Forgive me with the tissue. It's a little embarrassing, but and the sniffles. There is, uh, there are campaigns happening right now in this country
yeah,
to uh, reframe the narrative. There are
okay,
two campaigns.
yeah,
One is to reframe the narrative to tell a complete story of American history and to not exclude anyone, to include everyone. That
yeah,
would be Black Americans, that would be Asians, that
yeah,
would be indigenous people, all who contributed to this country.
yeah,
There's also a campaign to shut that narrative down.
okay,
Um, Maybe your viewers have heard of critical race theory. Well,
yeah,
critical race theory is taught in law school. It's not taught to young kids, but it's a
okay,
boogeyman now. Critical
okay,
race theory has been used by politicians
okay,
as a claim that to teach about race is to denigrate American history,
yeah,
to shame America's white boys and girls,
right,
to knock people like Thomas Jefferson off
yeah,
their pedestal.
yeah,
Critical race theory is not taught to children, but
yeah,
the truth of American history should be, are
yeah,
we not strong enough to learn our complete history? Are we not strong enough to learn that not only were Americans not imperfect, but cruel?
yeah,
Are we not strong enough to learn that men, women, and sometimes children, whole families, were lynched
yeah,
because they tried to exercise their rights or because
yeah,
they didn't move out of the way to the side on the side when a white woman was walking on the sidewalk, or because they wanted to collect money that was their due?
yeah.
Are we not strong enough to learn that history? Why don't we have an anti-lynching bill in the United States right now? Why can't we have these simple, basic acknowledgments
Yeah.
of what we did? Are we not strong enough to know that we stole this land?
Yeah.
Europeans stole this land?
Yeah.
Acknowledge it
Yeah.
and move forward. We would be better for it.
But you're right. We have to acknowledge so many things, and I don't even want to get into the lynching stuff. I mean, it is prevalent
There's so
everywhere.
much. There's so much.
It's across the globe. Okay.
Yes.
My final question, actually. We could be talking about this for hours. I mean, I am so happy that I came across this book. You can't even, it's not even a joke. So,
Thank you.
I really want to ask you, I mean, in your, journalistic career, you got to, interview so many people. I mean, quite high profile people. And to name a few, Oprah Winfrey, and some presidents as well. But you have mentioned in the book that once you got on the other side, you sometimes, I think the first time you faltered. What
The
does
first
it?
time I what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one. The first time
I,
I
I
what?
first time you went for, I suppose you were in a major interview, you were very nervous about it.
So a major interview um, regarding the book, is that what you mean? Is that what
No,
you, or something in
no, no,
Monticello? I'm trying
when
to
you
get.
other side, I suppose I'm talking about the one with Tess along with you. You were nervous about
Ah,
that one.
so so to follow up on Tess Taylor, she and I did some good things together, and
Yeah,
among those things was we did an interview with a public radio station in New York, and it wasn't that I was nervous so much as I wanted to make sure that I, first of all, didn't upset anyone, and that would principally be my son. I have a 29-year-old son who's kind of private, and
right.
sometimes I share stories about him. And I also wanted to make sure that I honored my ancestors. I wanted to hit the right tone for
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
And so I'm not uncomfortable speaking
yeah,
to the media.
yeah,
I am careful about what I say because I don't want to be misinterpreted. And in addition to that, I do work for Monticello. So, and I adore my job. I
yeah,
love the work I do.
yeah,
Um, I feel privileged to be able to to work where my ancestors were enslaved and be able to tell their story. So I'm cautious, but I
yeah,
also don't want to edit myself. Ah,
yeah.
um, I think that might be where you are. I did an interview with NBC. That was the first big interview. So I was fine
Yes.
with one with Tess Taylor. I did an interview with NBC, and that's when I was working at Monticello. It was my first big interview with
Oh
Monticello.
yes, yes. I think I
And
got it. Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
what it was. And I did edit myself because
I, I I'm kind of,
no,
everything
there's a
is in
lot there. I'm impressed that you know so much about. Trust me, I'm impressed you followed the story so well. It's wonderful, really wonderful. So well
I
that you know details I'd almost forgotten I wrote about. So yes, it was that first big interview with NBC, and I was nervous, and I did edit it. I did edit what I said, and so much so that Harry Smith, who did the interview, said to me, said, "You're editing yourself
you
even as
edit.
you speak." Yes, you're editing yourself. So the next time Harry Smith came back a couple of years later, and the next time he was there, I was totally comfortable and did not edit a single word and
Yeah,
just let it flow. I just let it
right.
flow. I was comfortable in the job. I knew what my responsibility was. My responsibility was to tell the story of my ancestors, to tell
Yeah,
the story of the bricks that I just shared with you, with the
yeah,
children's fingerprints in those bricks, to let
yeah,
people know that
yeah,
my great-great-great-grandfather, Peter Hemings, who was a brother of Sally Hemings, was a cook and a brewer there who helped again make that place successful. I didn't know, I wasn't comfortable enough in the knowledge during that first interview. Now ask me anything.
yeah. Even after, I was amazed that even after, joining Monticello, you kind of, studied further. I mean, it was not an easy road for you inside there as well. Uh, a lot of things, have happened. I really wanted to ask you about, and I shouldn't have, missed out on this, and I did earlier, that, there were DNAs taken, and that's what kind of, made it concrete that, you were a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. um, what was that process like when you are going through a DNA test and to prove yourself, which you kind of already know in your heart that you know that, but going through a DNA test and all of that, is it
Right.
nerve-wracking?
So the DNA test, there's a lot of attention given to it in the book, and that came, and that's part of the detective story, and that
Yes.
came out of my relationship with Tess Taylor. Um, and through the DNA test, we did, and lots of circumstantial evidence. None of this came easily. None of this came easily. And
Yeah.
none of it came without help. I did it with the assistance, the DNA testing with Tess Taylor, and then the other information that we needed to uncover the story through a woman named Cinder Stanton, Lucia Cinder Stanton, who became my mentor and who
Yeah.
was hugely instrumental in helping me uncover this story and who founded a project at Monticello, an initiative called the Getting Word Oral History Project, which
I was
collects.
like, in the middle of the book, I was like, come on, Cinder, let's do
Yes,
this.
I know,
Let's,
Cinder, exactly. I mean, she's a hero. She's a real hero in the book. Exactly, hit it right on the head.
you
And
know,
so,
what a
it was.
I'm so sorry. What a technique to kind of, Cinder was going backwards and you were
Right,
going, in the future. It's
right,
very interesting, how to find one's, place in history. I mean, the lineage. Yeah, please, please.
exactly. I was looking for my family. I
Yeah,
was looking for my ancestors, and I was looking for my relatives, my living relatives. So Cinder was going back to find my ancestors. I was using that information going forward to find my family descended from those ancestors. And again, the reasons that I was seeking that family, and all that's explained in the book. So the DNA helped us learn how it was indeed that what Aunt Peachy said, Aunt Peachy, um,
yeah,
and I have to reiterate this, Aunt Peachy was totally illiterate, but she
yeah,
believed that we were descended from Jefferson, and the research that we've done validated that belief.
yeah.
So she looms large in my life and
Right.
in this history. And so the DNA gave us evidence that we are, in fact, descended from Thomas Jefferson. Circumstantial evidence revealed that we are descended from Thomas Jefferson. And just for clarification, it's not just Jefferson, it's
Yeah.
through it's his wife as well. Because I am descended from one of Thomas Jefferson's, what we've discovered through one of Thomas Jefferson's great-great-grandsons.
Right.
So Jefferson was, and it's not giving anything away. It's what it's known. It's talked about it before. And there's so much more to the book than just discovering I'm descended from Jefferson.
It's
Jefferson
not.
and his wife were my 5 times great
It's
grandparents. Is
not
what it boils down
I
to.
we should mention that it's, I mean, it's your life. I mean,
Yeah,
half the book is your life, and this is of course a major part of your life, but there is family, there are heartbreaks, there is I mean, lots of happiness, and you were quite flamboyant. I mean, I must say, did you have a red Mustang in college? Wonderful.
I did have a
Good.
red Mustang.
I mean, that you can't get better than that. I mean, I mean, that's the epitome of cool. That has to be addressed.
Thanks, that's
Okay,
just great.
so
Thank you
yeah,
for
I mean,
saying that.
I could be asking a bunch of other questions, but we have little time on our hands. At the end, I would love to ask you about the publishing process, because there was so much literature with you, and of course, all that oral tradition that, of course, that had to be kind of transformed into something that everybody could understand easily, because there is too much information and it gets hard. I mean, in the non-fiction form. Tell us a little bit about that publishing process. How did you find the publisher? And yeah,
I was so lucky with
okay,
this. A friend introduced me to a book agent. The book
yeah,
agent loved the story. We worked on a proposal. It took a good year, 18 months to write the proposal and
wow,
pitched it to several publishers. It was an extraordinary experience. We interviewed each other. I interviewed publishers. They talked with me. Someone made a bid, and I ended up with HarperCollins.
yeah,
My the agency I work with is called the Black Agency. That's just the name of it. It's not that they deal with Black authors. It's just the name of the agency. And
anything,
and Jenny Herrera is my agent. She's phenomenal, and I had a great match with my editor, whose name is Patrick Bass at HarperCollins, and he's really great at his job. He stimulates thought. There's a line in my book that says, "I grew up Negro rich," and for people who don't understand what that means, well, read the book. That will explain it. But the language was mine, but the idea was stimulated by something that my editor said to me, that Patrick said to me.
can you repeat that? I missed it. Yeah,
Sorry?
the line that you mentioned.
The
Can
line,
you?
the first chapter opens up with, "I grew up Negro rich."
Oh,
And that's
yes, yes,
where the red Mustang comes in.
yes, yes.
And that idea came to me from a conversation I had with Patrick, my editor. Patrick says, your family, he says, they were like the Vanderbilts without money. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And having read Anderson Cooper's book, I thought, well, maybe not quite that, but sure, there's a lot of intrigue in my family as well.
Yeah,
So no, we didn't have that kind of money, but we had comfort. And
yeah,
so that's where the term Negro rich comes in. And
yeah,
it was that process, working with an editor who was able to understand the complexity of my family and the aspirations
yeah.
of my family that really triggered that line. And that's one of my favorites in the book, because that really encapsulates who we were.
Yeah. Wonderful. I mean, this has been, I mean, I would say one of the finest books that I've read in a long time. One
Oh,
of the
thank you.
fiction. It is just amazing. I would compare it to others from the US, but I don't want to do that. I love all. One of the better ones, to be honest. And I hope, it gets all the accolades that it deserves. Somebody is complimenting me. Great to see you, Rohan. Love what you have done with Book Nuts. That is the first comment I've ever gotten on a live session. It's always about the authors. The authors make it special, Akshat, the Akshat stand. The authors make it special, and it is always about the authors and the books. Thank you so much, Gayle. It has been such a pleasure. And again, can we show the cover again?
Oh, yes,
Perhaps
please.
so that.
Absolutely. Ron, thank you. This has been a great conversation, and that it's so thrilling to be able to speak to you. And this morning, thousands of miles away, this is just fabulous. So this is
It's
the book. It's got
trust
nice
me.
pictures
You
in it.
you
My
pick up book.
grandmother.
Oh, wonderful! It has got illustrations also. I didn't have that on the PDF that the publishers sent.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's got lots of really good pictures on it,
Oh
in it.
my gosh, I
Yeah.
have I missed all of that. Oh my
Oh,
goodness!
wow. No, you've got
I
to get this.
I need to get a hard copy. So it's because the PDF must have been pre-edit or something like that.
Oh,
Perhaps
I'm
so.
so sorry. I didn't know the pic.
No, wow,
This is how we grew up. These are
wow,
my sisters. Can you see
wonderful.
that? Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have asked you to show these pictures earlier. Something else you want to share before we leave? Because it's
Let's see.
amazing.
This is
Do you
my
have the red?
family. Can you see this? That's my family.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
wonderful. Do you have the red
Little.
mustard
I
somewhere?
don't. We talked about the exhibition, The Life of Sally Hemings. This is part of the exhibition. If you can see
Oh,
that picture, it's
yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
simple, very elegant,
Yeah.
and very powerful. This is
And
when we talk about reclamation. So, and I mentioned the Getting Word Oral History Project.
right,
Um, the descendants come to Monticello periodically. Some of us participate in a program called the Slave Dwelling Project, where we spend the night there at Monticello. This is the colonnade where Sally Hemings' room is, and some
okay,
other rooms, including the kitchen, the original kitchen.
right.
And we're there. This is my son dancing there on the front, and we're there doing African dancing there on the
Yeah.
south lawn of Monticello.
And you sleep, right?
Reclamation.
Sleep on the floor, right?
So we sleep on the floor. I did it
Okay.
once. I shall never do that again.
To kind of replicate sort of what was happening back then, right? It's
Exactly.
great tribute. I was not aware of the pictures. I'm going to get a hard copy for sure.
Oh, great.
Love the book. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank
And we
you.
finally figured out Instagram Live.
Yeah, I know. Woo woo. You are fabulous. You're really fabulous. Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon. Stay in touch, please.
Oh, well, I'm going to visit.
And you should come to Goa. You should come to Goa.
Absolutely. We will
Yeah.
stay in touch. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.